Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. Today we're doing dovetails. I know, another dovetail video. Well, actually I was looking through my videos and I have never done a video on how I make dovetails. So let's fix that. Now before I dive in, dovetails are something that scare a lot of people because there's a mystique to them. But in all honesty, they're one of the basic joints. If you can do this, then you can do most any other joint. It's one of these that you've just got to learn. And you're going to mess up. That's okay, that's part of the process. The only way you are going to learn the skill of doing this by hand is to do it. You can watch all the videos, read all the books, and until you actually jump in and do it, you're never going to learn the skill. So don't be afraid. You're going to make dovetails that aren't perfect. That's great. They will still be functional. That's one of the great things about a dovetail is even if it is gappy, it's still functional. It works, which is kind of relieving. So have some fun, dive in, and let's take a look at how I make dovetails. Now when it comes to dovetails, if you ask 5 different woodworkers how they do dovetails, you're going to get 11 different answers. Because there is no one way to do it, and there is no correct way to do it, and yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do it. So today I'm going to show you what I do. I try and make things as simple as possible with as few tools and as few steps as possible. That means that I'm going to be doing a little bit more work, but I like the way it comes out and I find it to be more fun. That's what's important to me. So let's take a look at the wood. So before we do anything else, it is very important that the end of your wood be exactly what you want it to be. It must be square both across the wood and perpendicular to the face. That is incredibly important. If this isn't square on both pieces, you're going to end up with dovetails that just don't look right. These have to be square. Check them, shoot them, make them perfect, and your dovetails will come out so much better. Next up, we need a stop mark on this. In other words, how far back will the dovetails go into this? Normally what people are going to do is grab a marking gauge, set it on here, and then adjust the marking gauge to the thickness of the board. Then take that over and transfer it onto this. And that's really good if both boards are exactly the same thickness and all boards involved are exactly the same thickness. But often if you're hand milling, these are going to be slightly different thicknesses. So I like to take it a slightly different. I like to use the reality of the board, set one on there, use my marking gauge, set it flat on here, and put a mark. Now I know precisely how thick that board is. And then I can do the same thing to this one. And if I put the mark all the way across, well now I have my stop mark. And I know that this stop mark is exactly the same as the board I'm going to be joining it to. Most of the time, the accuracy difference between using a marking gauge and using the reality of the thickness is going to be negligible. It's not going to make that big a difference. But every now and then, it makes a big difference. And at this point, every little bit you're off gets compounded with later steps. The more accurate you can be early, the better you're going to be in the future. Next up, we're going to chalk it up in the vise. If you have a Moxon vise, that's great. I actually like to do it in my end vise. I just raise it up a little bit higher, and I'll do my cutting up here. I like it to be about 6 inches higher than my normal bench height. My bench is pretty high, so if you have a lower bench, you might want to raise it up even higher than that. And this is the point at where people can get really finicky about the layout on this. But let me tell you a little secret. At this point, it doesn't matter. You can make these any way you want, in any shape, as ugly or as pretty as you want, and it doesn't make any difference at all because you're going to make the pins match the tails. And that makes it really freeing because at this point, if you mess up, it's not a mess up because you can make the pins match it. So at this point, you can do anything you want. Have a little bit of fun. This is the point where people come in with dividers and they start laying things out and walking it and adjusting it back and forth, and you set up the pins until you get just the size you want. But honestly, that's just another step. Dividers are fun and can give you really accurate lines and make things balanced, but honestly, it doesn't matter at this point, so why not have a little bit of fun and try some skills? So I'm going to use the mirror trick to see when it is straight in line. I want to make sure that the board continues in the mirror onto the other side there. And I'm going to put it in about 1/4 inch to 1/8 inch away, and I'm going to start a kerf here. And that's my first mark. Then I'm going to move it over to the opposite side of the board, and I'm going to eyeball it being the same distance away from this side. And I'm going to use that mirror trick to make sure I'm 90 degrees, and there's my other mark. Then I'm going to eyeball where middle of the board is. And at this point, I'm just going to make a little mark here. This is just an identifier, so I can come off of that middle mark the same amount on the other side. So I'm going to come about 1/4 inch away from it here, use the mirror trick again, and one mark there. About 1/4 inch away, use the mirror trick again, right there. So now I have 4 marks where the sides of my dovetails need to be. Yes, I could do it with this, and I could probably get it a little more accurate, but the eyeball is what is going to be judging if this is accurate. And if it looks accurate to my eyeball now, it's going to look accurate to my eyeball when it's done. One less step you have to mess with. Now, at this point, a lot of people are going to use one of these to pick their correct angle, and you're going to hear a lot of people saying, oh, for hardwoods, you need to use a very shallow angle, like a 1:8, and for softwoods, you need to use a more aggressive angle, like a 1:5. Shmooey, it really doesn't make any difference mechanically. Yeah, technically, maybe a tiny bit difference in actual function, but in the reality, over 100 years, it's not going to make a difference what angle it's at. As long as the tails are bigger at the top than they are at the bottom, they're going to work. So that's one more step I can eliminate. So rather than drawing any lines on here, I put it in that mark I have, and then I lean it to whatever angle looks good to me. I'm going to do something right about there, and I'm going to continue down this angle until I get to that stop mark. And then I'm going to skip a line and go to the other one, and I'm going to match that exact same angle. Just like that. Then we're going to come over to the other side of the table, match that angle again, come back over here, and just like that, I've got tails. When people first get started with hand tools, they think, ooh, I need to go get a dovetail saw. A really good dovetail saw will improve my skills. And yeah, it feels good. It's functional. But honestly, this is one of the least used saws. And there's like 3 or 4 others you should get before you get a dovetail saw. Until then, just use a hacksaw. It's basically the exact same thing. And I actually have a couple videos on making dovetails with a hacksaw. Fine little teeth, and it works perfectly fine. So now we're going to take it out of this, rotate it 90 degrees, and cut off that pin space on here so we have a half pin on there. Earlier when we made our depth cut, we put a cut on here, and I'm going to set my saw right on that. I'm actually going to pinch the board. Pinching the board allows me to push the plate side by side with my thumb, and I can set it right on that line, start the nick, and cut down. At this point we can come into the chisel and just get rid of any stray fibers that are in here. Clean them back. If you ever find that you need to move just a little bit, the chisel's a little too aggressive, come into the file and just clean up the surface a hair, and you can get that really nice, clean, smooth cut with just a couple passes from the file. For the piece in the middle, a lot of people come in with a coping saw and scoop it out, but then you still have to come back and chisel it. And so in my book, that's just one extra step. So why not just chisel it and do it all in one step? I found it to take about the exact same amount of time to do either, or some people find it's a little easier to do one or the other, one's a little faster than the other, so experiment and try some things out. But for me, just chisel it. I like to put it up in a hold fast, so when I'm pushing against it, it's actually riding back into the hold fast. One good tap and it's locked in place. That's not going much of anywhere, and I'm going to be putting a lot less force on that. For the chisel work, I'm going to hold the chisel right here, and that way I can always be moving it and controlling it. I have one finger that's resting on the board and sliding around. That gives me a little more accuracy. So I'm going to set it 1/16 inch or so away from my stop line. One good tap, move it over, one good tap, and then I'm going to bring it back a little ways and pare it down. Bevel down work, really quick and easy. I'm not moving my finger on the chisel. I'm going to move it over to the exact same spot again, and undercut again. Just rinse and repeat until you're down about halfway on this side. And then we're going to go about halfway back to that marking gauge line, because this is about where we'd be with the coping saw. Once again. And then I'm going to go right into that marking gauge line. Just going to eyeball what feels vertical, maybe undercut it a little bit. And we're halfway down. Make sure you clean off any junk in between, flip the board over and set it down. Then rinse and repeat, exact same thing we just did. I want to take it slowly to try and get as clean a cut as I can. Just like that, we're through. Then we're going to work our way back to that stop cut line, set right into the line, trim it down. Now this is a really important step. Set a square in here and make sure that the bottom of that is perfectly square to your face. You want it to be perfectly square all the way across so you get a nice sharp edge on both of those. If you need a little bit of work, bring in that file and just do a little bit of detail on those or on the sides of the tails. Clean them up, smooth them up. And now we have a perfect set of tails ready to put some pins in. So to transfer the tails to the pin board, I'm going to set this in the vise, and I want to bring it to the exact height of my block plane, or any other block of wood, or something just to raise it a little bit off the bench. Now I could do it flush on the bench, but I find that having a little bit of springiness between the two makes it just a little easier to hold in place. Slide the block plane back, put the other board on the block plane, and then I can line this up right to my side. I'm going to use a chisel to set on here and make sure this face is perfectly flush with this face, and then I'm going to slide it until the tail is perfectly flush with the outside. And at that point I know I'm exactly where I need to be. I could bring in a hold fast to lock this down in place so it doesn't move around, but usually I find just holding it with my own hand is pretty good. So now I'm going to come in with my marking gauge line, I'm going to reach back in there, and I'm going to very, very carefully with a light cut, a medium cut, and then a hard cut. I'm going to do the same thing on this one, light, medium, hard. And then back over to this one, light, medium. This is the most important step of the whole thing, transferring from one to the other. If this is done poorly, your dovetails will be poor, but if this is done well, your dovetails have a very good chance of being perfect, or as close as humanly possible to what perfect might be. So now we have marks across the top and a stop cut line. I want to come in here and mark where the tails are at, just so I know this is what I'm getting rid of. I don't want to keep this because I have so many times cut on the wrong side of the line. If I don't mark them, I'm going to end up cutting the wrong side. The other thing I may want to do is if I really want to be extra careful, I'm going to put my knife mark into the corner where that top line is, put my square on here, and make one mark down the face. Having a square mark on this side makes it a little easier to see with the saw. Sometimes you can see the reflection to do a perfectly vertical cut, but sometimes you can't. So if I really want a nice face, I'm going to come in and mark all of these down lines just to give my eyeball something to track with the saw. Just like before, I'm going to pinch the back corner of the board, set the saw on there, and establish a cut across the top, making sure I'm cutting on the inside of the line. Once that's established, I can go to town and track that vertical line all the way down the board. I'm going to go to my stop cut here, one more match to hit the stop cut on the backside. When holding a saw, particularly a dovetail saw, you want to have a loose grip. Your index finger should be pointing forward. You should have 3 fingers on here, and it should be balancing between your middle finger and the back of your palm on that horn there. That should be what's holding it up. You should be able to cut it with almost no grip at all. It should be very loose. If you are squeezing the grip, the saw is going to turn as you squeeze it. You want to have a very loose grip on it. So we're going to set it on here, start our cut, establish it, let the saw's weight do the work for you. Loose, loose grip, down to your stop cut, down to the stop cut on the other side. So now we've cut vertically and we remove these 2 pins. Again, I could come in with a coping saw, but I just prefer to chisel them out exactly the way I did it before. So again, it's all about chopping in and then paring out. And if you have multiples of these, you can actually stack them up together and gang cut them so you can do a bunch at once. Though in this case I just have the one, so we're just going to chop in and pare back. Once we've chopped in halfway, then we can come back and cut right down that baseline. Then we can flip it over, clean off the work surface underneath. I don't want anything denting it, and do the other side. Whatever you do, make sure you slip and cut yourself because every project requires a blood sacrifice. And just like that, we're chopped through. We can come back to that marking gauge line and clean it up nice and square. We do then want to make sure we come back in and check that everything is precisely square. It is very, very important that this be square to the face. So it should fit perfectly, but it never does. In this case, I'm actually pretty close. You can see I'm sliding in over here and I'm sliding in over here, so that lets me know that these 2 edges are fine. But this one in the middle, I need a little bit more work, and I sure see that, yeah, I've got a little bit extra slack where I'm just off of my marking gauge line. So I could come in with a chisel, put it on that marking gauge line, and slide right on down. But in this case, I stayed a little farther away from the line, so I can come in with a file and sneak up on it. It's always better to take small steps in increments to get a clean, smooth cut. If you take off too much too fast, then you're just going to end up with gaps. After that little bit of tweaking, I can get it down to about there, but again, you can see it's still rocking on that middle point, so I'm rubbing here. I need to take off just a hair more, just a little bit more with the file, and it should slide down in. You want to take off a little bit and test it, take off a little bit and test it until It slides right down in. And oh, now I'm getting really, really close. I mean, it's just about to fit. If I wanted to, I could take a mallet and jam this down on, but I would probably end up splitting it out. If I can't tap it down with my hand, it's pretty tight. So I'm going to file off just a little bit, and actually got a smooth sticking out here. I can see that it's actually bruising the wood there, getting a little shiny spot. After a couple strokes with that, now, very light tapping. Just like that, there's a dovetail. That's happy. Most of the time, if you have problems, you're going to see them on the inside here. If you see a nice clean line like that, you've done okay. Pretty good out here. Tiny bit of gapping here and here, but I think that will just clean up once I put some glue on there and plane it down. Those will disappear perfectly. That side's really nice and flat. I like that one. That's a pretty decent dovetail. I'll take that one. When it comes to dovetails, it's one of those things that you can really overthink, and you can do all sorts of jigs and layout lines and bring in multiple tools, or you can just have a little bit of fun with it. This really is a joint that, even if it's cut poorly, it will still be a good functional joint as long as you're not making pyramids and you're actually making dovetails. It's a decent joint, and you can make some really big mistakes and still have a good functional joint. Is it going to be perfect? No. It's something that's going to require practice. You're going to have to do them over and over again until your brain gets used to it. And then years down the road, when you come to the next project that's going to need dovetails, you're going to have to relearn it again. So have a little bit of fun, experiment, try something different, and don't be afraid to mess up, because that is how you learn. If you just watch videos and think you know what you're doing, you don't. It's something you've got to do over and over again until you get it right. And even then, you're still going to mess up sometime in the future. So don't be a perfectionist. Have some fun, dive in, make dovetails, and just have a good time in the shop. So I hope you like this. If you want to see more videos, I have dozens of videos on dovetails, how to make them faster, how to make them with different tools, how to do it with a hacksaw. It's one of those joints I've done a bunch, but surprisingly I've never done a how I do dovetails video. So there you go. I hope you like this. If you do have any other comments, thoughts, questions, suggestions, snide remarks, let me know those down in the comments down below. I'd love to read through them. Anything you do put down there does help the channel, so thank you for that. As well as hitting like, share, subscribe, comment. Thank you. Those do help us and get us in front of more people. That means a lot. And to take it one step farther, we have everyone scrolling over on the side. They are the patrons on Patreon. They are the real superheroes here, because they are the ones quite literally keeping the lights on. We are completely sponsored by you, the viewers, so thank you for that. Patrons, as members, as well as people who click that join button, you are the ones keeping us going. If you'd like to find out more about that, I have links to Patreon in the description down below, or you can become a member and click the little join button, and we do have special perks for both. So thank you for that. I think that'll do it for now, and until next time, have a wonderful day. Try as I might, I've never figured out what is so sexy about bird butts.